Okay, good evening. Thank you for listening to She's Always Right and He's Never Wrong, a podcast with two Black psychologists talking about today's issues, anything from politics to relationships and anything in between. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Take it away, Bilal.
All right. Happy Black History Month, everyone.
Woo! Yeah.
All right. Well, as we get started today, we have a special guest in the house, Mrs. Rosalind Pellis, and she is our guest for our live conversation today. Conversation with the Shero. All right. Turn it over to my co-host here.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are featuring, in honor of Black History Month, a Shero. That's right, a local icon. Miss Rosalind Pellis, welcome to our podcast this afternoon. She's always right and he's never wrong. Welcomes you to our first live interview. She's a civil rights activist, an attorney, community organizer, mother, wife, daughter, sister, and many other hats, and not necessarily in that order. We are excited to begin this conversation. Next slide, please. Okay, so allow us to introduce her to you, our own local Shero. And we also mentioned that she wears many other hats in between, and we'll talk about that after I finish reading her bio. Okay, Miss Rosalind Woodward Pellis is a veteran of the civil rights and workers' rights movements. She has a long history of social justice activism that spans 5 decades, beginning with her work as a teenager in the Congress of Racial Equality. Ms. Pellis is currently the Vice President of Repairers of the Breach, a nonpartisan organization that seeks to build a progressive agenda and movement rooted in the moral values of justice, fairness, and the common good. She is also serving as the Senior Strategic Advisor of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. She is the former executive director of the North Carolina NAACP. And while at the North Carolina NAACP, she also served as a senior strategist and advisor to North Carolina's Moral Monday Forward Together movement during the pivotal and historic year when Moral Mondays erupted in the state capital of Raleigh, spread across the state, and inspired the nation. Prior to this, Ms. Pellis was the director of the Civil, Human, and Women's Rights Departments at the National American Federation of Labor Congress of Industrial Organizations, basically the AFL CIO. She also served as the executive director of the Union Community Fund, a national labor charity. Ms. Pellis was also the executive director of the National Rainbow Coalition and special assistant to Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr. Over the years, Rosalind Pellis has been an advocate and organizer. She was, excuse me, a national representative for the National Treasury Employees Union and executive director of the National Education Association staff organization. Early in her career in North Carolina, Ms. Pellis organized hospital and textile workers and against the hatred and racist violence of the Ku Klux Klan and Nazi Party. Ms. Pellis served on the board of directors of the Highlander Research and Education Center, where she was the board chair, and on the National Board of Interfaith Worker Justice. Ms. Pellis was named one of the country's outstanding African American women labor leaders by the Institute for Policy Studies in the And Still I Rise Black Women Labor Leaders Initiative. She was also the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award from a Working Class Studies Association. Ms. Pellis has been a lecturer and workshop leader across the United States, Canada, Tanzania, and Uganda. Ms. Pellis received a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from North Carolina Central University and a Juris Doctor degree from Howard University School of Law. Please join me in welcoming this cultural icon, also known as Bilal's mama. Welcome.
All
Take it
right,
away,
all right,
Bilal.
all right. Give it up for my mama. Woo! All right. Well, we are blessed, pleased, excited to have you with us this afternoon. And allow you to just share some insights and some of your wisdoms on our first live podcast. All right, Sabrina, am I starting off? I'm excited, so I'm gonna delay some of that excitement. I'm gonna ask my sister to go ahead and start us off, get this conversation rolling.
Well, let's be clear. You know that I'm always right. So, yes, I'll go ahead and get the party started. All right. So, Sister Roz, Miss Roz, as I know you so fondly as, we'll go ahead and jump in there and just ask you a few questions. And
Okay.
please feel comfortable with expanding, however short or long you want to be. We have until tomorrow morning to finish this out. I'm kidding. But what I will say is if you could just first tell us about why you got involved in the struggle for civil and human rights. Why?
So first of all, I am so glad to be here and to be in this inaugural live podcast. And so glad to join two brilliant psychologists who are making their way in the world and changing the world. So I'm glad to be here. So, I mean, I have been in a movement since I was 13 years old, and I'm now 72. I grew up in the segregated South in what this country knew as apartheid, as our apartheid in the US. Um, and I also, so that's one factor. The other factor is that I grew up in a household where I was constantly told that if I see something that is wrong, that I think I might be able to fix, that I should do that. So these two factors came together. And so, and what, when I looked around, something was certainly wrong. You know, people were forced to ride in the back of the bus. People were forced to go up long steps to get to see a movie. Restaurants were refusing to serve people. You know, this was dilapidated housing. These were the things that, as I looked around as a young teenager, that I saw, and they certainly fit those things that were not right that needed fixing. And as it happened, my church was the headquarters for the Congress of Racial Equality Corps. And so it was just a perfect fit. And so I read a lot about the civil rights movement. We lived just miles from Greensboro, so I understood what was happening with the sit-ins in Greensboro. And I made a decision with my family that I wanted to be a part of the movement. And I wanted to be a part of sit-ins. I wanted to understand civil disobedience, and I wanted to change things. And that's exactly what I did. That's where I started.
Wow. So you weren't scared? Like just a little bit? People were
I was
being
scared
lynched.
often.
Hmm.
I was scared often. We had been trained well, but I was scared. But I also um, knew from just being in my own family that it took courage to change things and that you needed to do that. My father understood that very well, and he taught that. He taught it often. Now, he taught it from the time I was about 6. So as a 6-year-old, that's a pretty heavy lesson. But I grew into that lesson as a young teenager, and it served me well.
Wow, that's awesome. Isaiah, I need you to be a warrior like Miss Roz. Oh, he's not in the room yet, but we'll get him there.
That's right. That's right. The other thing I'm thinking about is this is a huge decision to make at 13 years old. We start thinking about what people are doing at 13, maybe in 7th grade, maybe in 8th grade. I mean, you're making an adult decision. You're making a decision about not just changing your life and your family's life, but this is not hyperbole, but hundreds of thousands of lives that you're a part of that impact, that change process. So what is it in a 13-year-old? And I hear you saying your father, the family you grew up in, but what is it? What was it within you as a 13-year-old that says, I have to do this?
You know, all I can attribute it to is my family. I mean, we had a code of what was right and wrong, a code of morality, and a code that always where we always talked about racial justice. And so it was part of what I grew up in. So it really was not hard for me to understand what to do. So I was in about the ninth grade, going about the ninth grade. And was really uh, mentored and held in that in the sit-in movement by folks who I trusted, who were in my church, who I knew were doing the right thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
I appreciate that. So what I hear you saying, Ma, you've talked about being involved in the civil rights movement for over 50 years. And so we're wondering what has kept you in the struggle.
So on any given day, I think about that. But the real thing is, I remember words of Dr. Martin Luther King when he said, "We've got to stay with it till it's done."
Yeah.
And so that kind of is been in my head. And the other thing is, requires the long
Mhm.
haul. When I was a young woman, I thought it was just a matter of changing, public accommodations, and that would make the world right. And then as I got older, I thought, making some changes and ensuring voting rights would make it fully right. But I came to understand that it was much more than that. And that it required continued effort. And so, I came to understand ultimately that it was that each of these things mattered, but that we were dealing with something that was bigger than any one of those things. And so what you had, and what I came to understand, is that we were talking about structural racism that could
Mhm.
not be in and of itself solved by one bill or one change of heart or one anything, but there had to be a big response to this, a
Mhm.
response that took in all these things. The target had to be bigger than one store. I mean, when I started the civil rights movement, we were sitting down at K&W cafeteria, so it was much more than K&W cafeteria. It was much more than that. It was the policies in the country. It was not only the names people might call you, but it was what they were doing on the job. It was all these things together. So over time, listening to having Martin Luther King's words in my head that you have to get the job done means you're doing this for the long haul. And then as you get older, it became clear to me that it wasn't immediate, that I wasn't going to have it tomorrow, and I wasn't going to have this kind of fundamental change that's required in this country, that I wasn't going to have it right away. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
now I'm talking about, how do I make this a better country for my family? But the thing is that every year that one person fights, they gain a little more experience. They can share that experience. They can continue to chip away at the system that causes Black people and poor people to be oppressed, to fight each other, and not to win, while the rich just continue to get richer and continue to run the country. So
Mhm.
that's it. That's what keeps me going. I sometimes joke with my husband, Don, that I must have sang "We Shall Overcome" tens of thousands of times in my life. But I still, I still have to hang in there
Right.
because it's important. And even though I know it's not happening before, in the way that I think it should happen in my lifetime, but I know that it will happen
Mhm.
because I have faith in people and oppressed people. And I know that they will not sit by and be oppressed and live in a system forever that is so oppressive and so racialized. So
Mhm.
I have a lot of hope in folks
Mhm.
that are going to come after me and have a lot of wisdom that I've gained from people who've gone before me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, and I heard you say, I really appreciate that insight. But one of the things I also heard you say was this idea of faith,
Mhm.
the faith of seeing it through, right?
Mhm.
Because it's not just seeing it through. It sounds like you kept the faith,
Yeah.
right? That there's not just doing it until the work is done, but that faith and it seems really important.
No, it is important. And it's a faith that people will not be oppressed, that people will stand in their own agency and change what they need to change. And it's an understanding that in a system like we live in, that it takes time, that it can be incremental, but knowing that just as I and so many others came to understand what had to happen, just like you all on this today understand that. I mean, people will just continue to just the people for the majority.
Hmm. But I have to ask, I think, Miss Roz, though, 5 decades,
Mm.
aren't you tired? I mean, for many, I think people that started this work, obviously 30, 40 years ago, many of them have said, you know what, just take the baton, give this to the young people. It's not for us to do anymore. We've done our part. It's time for the next generation to pick up and run. Again, aren't you tired?
The answer is yes. But part of me truly believes that I need to be in this fight as long as I have something to bring and something to share. And so people talk to me about passing the baton. And I think as long as I can run, I want to be in a relay. I want to share the baton
Hmm.
because I
Hmm.
can keep learning stuff from folks who are coming behind me, who can run faster and are smarter. And they might be able to learn a few things from me, and together we can win this race. And so, yes, I am tired and I am energized by movements as they come, as they happen, as new movements come forward. So I'm energized as I see these movements that shift from the basic, the early 60s, that shift from merely hoping that by sitting in a KNW, you're going to have a change. I see movements where people are now folks who are not just allies, but co-conspirators who aren't Black, who aren't people of color, who have taken this. And it also gives me hope. It feeds into that faith that you were asking about earlier.
Hmm. Hmm.
Absolutely. Well, you definitely have paved the way. And we are just, I mean, so inspired by the work that was done really before us. You've laid out the path for us to continue this work. But I think we have to think about as well. I mean, obviously, with all that you've done, experienced, and learned, what would you say are some important lessons that you've learned while doing this work?
Yeah. The lessons are critical, and they have to be learned and shared and so many different people. And I've learned from places where I never expected to learn lessons. But I learned most of all that you have to study what it is that's oppressing you. You have to be open to reading and studying and thinking hard and doing an analysis about what's happening in the country so you're on the right path. I learned you have to listen hard. When you're talking about making change, you have to listen to all the folks around you so that you're not, so that I'm not, I have to do this so that I'm not replacing other people's thoughts with my own thinking as we try to take on a struggle together. And this whole notion about a long haul, really opportunity to just say to slow down enough so that I am doing the best I can do on any given day. And people have the answers. The answers aren't in every book, the answers in a classroom necessarily. The answers aren't in the lessons, don't come in the place that one would expect.
Absolutely.
The you in church every Sunday thinking about what's going to happen to her grandchild. The lesson comes from the person who is without home, but who is willing to take a minute to tell you how they got there. So I've learned to really be with folks who can actually give me something to take with me on my way. I try to share with them, but it's because of them that I'm able to do most of what I can do and most of what I can contribute. Tamaqui, it's the Mrs. Farrells who ran a tenants group in Durham, North Carolina. I mean, it's a woman who fundamentally knows that the system does not work for her, and her son gets beat up by the police, and she knows that she has to lead a year-long struggle against police brutality that changes Durham. Those are the people that I've learned from over the years, and I so appreciate that. And without that, I don't think I would have been able to do what I've done uh, in the past 50 years.
I think, Miss Pellis, you make such a valid point in that I think sometimes we get so caught up in the people we see on TV, or the people that history books were written about, or people that kind of make it to the larger level stages. But really, this work is individuals. It's the people that maybe you never even knew that lived next door to you, that may have been, neighbors of yours, or people that you worked with. I mean, it's the everyday person that really has moved this along. But I really and particularly like what you said about your reference to women. We all know that Black women rule the world. Yay. But what I will say about that is, in thinking about the contributions that women have made to the civil rights and human rights movement, I don't know that we get to see as much. I mean, we hear about the Rosa Parks and people like that, but there are lots of other women I think that were a part. And I guess I just would like to know about your experience of the contributions of Black women in this movement.
So, part of this discussion that you're raising, um, women have been so country. Women were back, especially Black women, when folks were on a plantation, women were protecting their families. Women were leading people out of enslaved people out of movement. Women were doing the work. Women were participating in the thinking and in the doing and in the planning. And often, this is in the civil rights movement, women,
Yes.
they didn't get they might have typed the speech and added points to the speech, but they didn't make the speeches.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't get on the committees. I think that's changing now because there's a greater demand for it, but we've got a long history where women's leadership has been denied, and we have all suffered from that. Um, Women bring a strength, a courage, and understanding, and just common sense to movements. And if that is denied a movement, if that is denied a place in this society, we lose. And to move away from that, I don't think we're there yet. I mean, we can look around and know we're not there yet, but I think we're moving in that direction. I think we're seeing a call for that as part of the movement for racial justice, for social justice. It's not let's not get racial, let's get racial justice first, and then we'll bring the women later. It's a call for them to come up together, for these demands to come together. And so I think that's a positive thing for movement. And if you look at Atlanta, the Atlanta senatorial race and the whole the contributions made by many Black women, you know, in Atlanta, in Georgia, and across the country, who are just women who have just been sticking to it year after year after year. And so I think we're turning the corner on that. I don't think we've made it. And I think we have to keep pushing our brothers in the right direction on this.
That's
You know,
right.
we have
That's right.
to let them know that you do this at your own peril.
Mm-hmm.
But I've
No.
had a lot of fights about this over the years.
Yeah. No, but I don't need to say you making sense. You making sense. But I think for particularly for Black men in the struggle, I think that not just having, as you said, upholding the church or lifting the family or all the things that Black women are doing, that can't be the only thing that Black women are doing.
That's right.
And as you said, what's happening in Georgia and all across the country, you know, the women who were leading up to Black Lives
That's right.
movement, we start to see all around in this country, but really around the globe.
That's
I
right.
think is really powerful, and that recognition is needed.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna shift this a little bit, and maybe the shift really is bringing us even giving us this understanding of historically what brought you to this point, talking about your work, and I really want to bring us into the here and now. And I'm wondering, and this maybe is really dovetail with what you just said. Can you give us your views on kind of racism in this country, as well as the class divide that we experience today?
Yeah. No, I think that we have made progress. You know, it'd be foolish to say that nothing's happened. I mean, though we're tempted on many days, given the circumstances, because it feels old, but there's been progress made, and then there's been progress lost. It's a, you know, we're, you know, it's in a tug of war, and we've got to figure out how to win it. But racism is on the rise, contrary to, there was a school of thought when Barack Obama became president, that this was a post-racial society.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, Obama became the president.
Right.
And so, but it lulled some people into how we thought, you know, how we were moving in a social agenda.
Mm-hmm.
But racism is so systemic that it takes a fight. It's not one election. It's not one president. It's a systemic problem in this country, and it's still there. And we're seeing it a lot. You know, we've seen it especially in the last 4 years. It's not that it was new, and it's not that something magic happened in 4 years. But what happened is there was an opening. There was a permission for white supremacy and racism to be out front. And it came
Mm-hmm.
from the highest office in the land.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what we saw was a kind of a neo-fascist kind of agenda that was being promoted, that still is dangerous and being promoted.
Mm-hmm.
But racism is alive, and we need to understand its systemic nature. I think we understand it a lot better now. I think it's front and center now. And I think that it's shown itself not only in this rise of this white supremacist movement that's been lying dormant, but it's also shown itself in just various other ways. An example is we're able to see the true nature of racism and its systemic nature in the COVID crisis, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we've got is a pandemic that is taking the lives of and infecting mostly people of color and in particular Black people in this country. But when you go underneath the numbers, and we're now over 500,000, which is a shame, because those numbers could have been kept down, as we know, to 30,000. But now that we're down to up to 500,000, it's Black folks and people of color and poor people who are most represented in those numbers. And so if you go underneath, it's because of, why do people say these are the populations? Lack of health care, low wage jobs that are considered, quote, essential. Never essential before, not paid essential, but essential now.
Speak
And
on it.
that,
Speak on it, Mom.
and so exactly. And so you've got these, you've got, uninsured, millions of people are uninsured before the pandemic. People lost their job. People were looking for work before the pandemic. And when we look at the pandemic on top of that, it's a crisis. And so we're able to see clearly how systemic racism is just by peeling back the onion on this on COVID. I mean, how homelessness, and I mean, it goes on, and it just showed itself. And so people are more clear, as we looked at the murders, the police killings and the response to them. I mean, we're seeing that racism is alive and well. And we're also seeing how racism is not only baked into our system, but how it's used against white folks. See, because what we've got to do is to understand that racism hurts us all. And so historically, racism has been used to keep others also in their place, but keeping them feeling better than Black folks. So what we're seeing is all of this right before our eyes. And we're also seeing an opportunity to do something about it. And we're also seeing because it's so clear, we're seeing new people drawn into this struggle for social justice.
Yeah.
And that's important. I mean, the streets are full of people who are saying no to this,
Right.
who are saying no to all of this. And so racism is alive and well. The whole question around class is alive and well. Poor people are seeing for themselves that it's fine that people call them poor because they are, and many of us are. People are understanding what happens, why they are poor. And even though they think that there's a little bit of privilege based on skin color, that's getting torn down.
Yeah.
So when people in West Virginia are watching mansions say no to $15 and they can't put food on their table and they happen to be white, they are uniting with their Black brothers and sisters. And so this kind of in your face racism, this understanding of racism, is creating a climate for us to win and to fight back. But it looks a little bit different. It looks different, but it's still alive and well. And we've got to still fight. We've got to still fight to change that. And we've got to fight to change why racism is used in this system. And basically it's used so that those who want to control the system, generally the rich, can continue to do that by pitting other folks.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, Sabrina, I was lulled to sleep on President Obama's election night. I gotta be honest. I gotta be honest. I was out at Grant Park. I was screaming. I was jumping around. So
so was I. I was happy. I'm not gonna say I wasn't happy about it, but it wasn't. It didn't signal a post-racial society, but I was happy too.
Right.
Yeah. I think it took me a little bit to get my engine revved back up again. Though. I was like, I don't need to donate to any more campaigns. I'm good. So I think at least 2 weeks. Everything I did was like, it's cool. I didn't even notice racism was happening. I didn't even notice it. I didn't notice it. So I'm keeping real.
In some ways, I think too, it feels like racism was underground for a while, almost like it was buried. It's kind of like if you plant a garden and how you think nothing is really happening, and then all of a sudden it blooms, and you're like, wow, there's something going on, and you have these deep roots. And I think, racism in this country was somewhat looked at like that, where, we've made it past, we don't have to, eat in the back of the kitchen anymore, go on the back door, or, we can, stay at the same hotels, and, all, it's much better. And I think even, some of us as people of color got comfortable with access, more access maybe than our parents had, or more access than maybe our grandparents had. But I think this recent election of our previous president only highlighted and showed just how much was still there, how much work there
Mhm.
was to be done, and really how complacent many of us had become, especially after coming off of 8 years of President Obama. And as you said, Bilal, feeling comfortable and kicking, throwing our feet up on the coffee table, saying, "Hey, we won now." And things, things that I said to myself at 47 years old. Oh, I'll never see a black president in my lifetime. And then when I did, I'm like, what? We won
Yeah.
until we
Yeah.
didn't. So,
Until we did. And until we looked at the policies. So,
right.
we have to learn to look for racism in many places. So we've moved past the name calling and well, we're back to that. But there was a
Yes.
period, the period you described, where there was less of that. But
Mhm.
what was happening with the policies?
Right.
What was happening that created a situation where we had no health care, we had no jobs, so
Yeah.
and so we just have to keep looking for where racism, lifts its ugly head.
Well, I think that
Mhm.
it's really clear, particularly, I live in the great state of Texas, which we all know what has happened there in the last week or
Yikes.
two. I would be in the dark right now if it was a week ago. But what I'll tell you is that one of the things that was really notable for me living in this state was how many laws were still on the books that were outwardly discriminatory, to the tune of Black people can only live on this side of Highway 35 in the city, in the state's capital of Austin. What? And and the attitude is, well, we're not enforcing it. Yeah, but that's doesn't mean anything, because if I come in office and I want to enforce it, the law is
Exactly.
already there. It doesn't have to be written.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
Very.
Mhm.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And this is why it's so important about voting. And, I'll get on my agenda about that on another podcast. But, the fact that, people don't realize that it is in the policy where the discrimination remains, can be enhanced, and really has taken on another life of its own. Particularly, I think we've probably seen more things in these public hearings as we've been looking at, putting in new justices in place for the Supreme Court, things that I'll just say honestly, I never paid attention to before. It was not even important. But now I think you're absolutely right. Looking and examining policy, and really when you're going to the polls, really understanding. And even people sometimes that look like us, they ain't voting like us. They're not,
That's
Mhm.
they've signed side deals like a lot of other people have. And I mean, let's be clear, Senator Ted Cruz, who just was, a person of color, just was off gallivant. Okay. Anyway, we won't go there. But what I'll say is that, that's the trouble too, is that sometimes we get confused that everybody is not committed to the same cause, even though they may look a certain way.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
anyway, I'll hand it back to you, Bilal, to kind of
No,
take
Sabrina,
us
that's
to
a
the
great
next.
point.
Mm-hmm.
I think about when we were at Temple and hearing Sonia Sanchez, that all skin folk ain't kinfolk.
Yeah,
And when I heard her say
absolutely.
it, that resonated for me. I was like, true that.
Right.
And speaking to your point, just really understanding, where people are, how do they locate themselves, how do their positionality in the work that they do, and not just because of how they look. And I think that, as you said,
Yeah.
Cruz,
Mhm.
I don't think he really has reached out, identified with people of color and the like. And so then his class status, his divide, his
Mm-hmm.
affluent status then has separated him from the masses of people. And I think and as you said, I think it's a great point in terms of what was
Mm-hmm.
happening in Texas. You and I were texting. I was like, Sabrina, you got power. Let's what's
No,
going on.
no power, no water, no internet, no phone, no gas, no nothing. Just a flood. That's all I had. So,
And so I think, I think that what the two of y'all are talking about, I think this is that example.
mm-hmm.
And I think oftentimes what happens when people of color bring up these issues, two things happen. One, I think that people start saying, interestingly enough, during Trump time, it seemed that white people could now say conspiracy and everybody believed it. But I think
Yeah.
when black people of color, poor folks are saying, hey, these are issues, and then say, oh, this conspiracy, y'all are making stuff up. And so it's
Right.
invalidated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's happened. And then I think the other side is also is that this notion of you're being too sensitive. And to me, I'm like, so if a foot is on my neck, if I don't
Come
have
on.
sensitivity to it, then I don't know to say, get your foot off my neck.
Right.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that those two become then the part of, not all, but part of the mechanisms of escape and
Mhm.
and minimizing the issue. And so I think those things are really important. So Sister Ma, I hear you talking about this. And so my question is, so how do we respond? I mean, you and Sabrina laid out, these issues as they are, as they're impacting us now. So how do we respond?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I think we have to have multiple ways to respond. I think that, but what's across the board the same in terms of response is that we have to keep the heat on.
Yes.
We have to make sure that people hear our voices, and then we have to do that in every way that we can. So we have to deal with the folks and, who the elected officials. We
Mm-hmm.
have to be in the street. I mean, it's a little bit difficult to be in the street with the pandemic, but people are finding a way when it's safe
Yeah.
to be in the street. But we have to continue to organize.
Yeah.
We have to organize people to resist, people to take a stand against what's happening, and we have to educate folks.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to do all these things at the same time. We have to mobilize people, we have to organize them, we have to get them to vote,
Mm-hmm.
but vote for a reason, vote for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do all of that. And then we just have to move in step. And
Mm-hmm.
so everybody won't agree on everything, but
Mm-hmm.
but we can agree on the basics.
Yeah.
And when we can do that, we can find three things that we agree on that we can move together collectively on.
Yeah.
We need to live in those three things
Right.
and don't give up when our issue gets satisfied.
Yep.
We just have to
Mm-hmm.
stay together, keep pushing, keep mobilizing, keep organizing, just keep pushing at the door, just
Yep.
keep making our voices heard. And we have to do it in a way that is inclusive.
Yeah.
So we can't win totally on around racism with just Black folks and people of color.
Right.
We gotta be able to bring folks together. We gotta build a movement that's big and that's strong, that brings together people based on a set of principles and an understanding of how we are living in this country right now, bring us together and to move forward.
I
And I believe that's the only way we can win. It's just
Mm-hmm.
not a single issue, it's not a single group. It's like all of us who want to see a change in the system need to do that and need to come together to do it.
I think, Sister Raj, you are so right. And I think the one thing that we've seen in particular with the latest Black Lives Matter movement was the impact that it took around the world. I mean, you saw people in Korea, marches in Korea, marches in Japan, marches all over Europe. I mean, in Canada, in South America, and clearly it's not just, as you said, a Black people or person of color fight anymore. This is a everyone's fight because racism is impacting everyone. And I'll tell you the most recent, activity on the news around the discrimination activities that are happening against our Asian American brothers and sisters. I'll tell you, where were they? In the street protesting. I said, oh, that's
Exactly.
interesting, in the sense that, people are tired of being
Mm-hmm.
penalized for things they can't control, like how they look. So
Yeah.
with that, I think we, we can't deny the power of social media. I mean, social media is flipping this world upside down. I think it was the old kind of letter writing campaigns, and you still can't even deny that. Writing to your senators, writing to your people in public office, but now going to their Twitter page, going to their Facebook
Yeah.
pages, making your presence known and heard. And I'll tell people, I did some lobbying in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and I came back. I went to try to see a senator. It wasn't Ted Cruz, it was our other senator in Texas. I went to his office to try to do some lobbying around some mental health work. And I'll tell you, he wasn't there. He was supposed to be. And I came home and wrote him a nasty gram. Well, let me tell you, with that, I got a response. I got a response. And I think I was a
Okay.
little shocked. Now, granted, I think he turned that into putting me on his list. I was like, look, I'm not voting for you now. I just said you need to do something. But I'll tell you, I got someone's attention. Now, maybe it wasn't his, but I got a staffer's attention that
Yeah,
started responding to me. And I think we just can't deny the impact, making the phone calls. All we have so many mediums now to get the attention of the people that are in office to serve us. And we need to put their feet to the fire. I like what you said about keeping the heat on. We have to.
yeah,
That is the only way to get it done. And this work will
Yeah.
not stop unless
Yeah.
we keep it going. So,
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
All right. Well,
absolutely.
I'm excited, but I'm gonna push us ahead here a little bit, just kind of thinking about time.
Okay.
So what I heard also is you're working with the Poor People's Campaign,
Yeah.
and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and tell us about the work of the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah. So the Poor People's Campaign is a continuation and enlarging of the campaign that Dr. King was leading as at the time of his assassination. It was an understanding that he had come to, that people need to come together across all lines
Mhm.
and fight against poverty in this country, unjust wars, racism, and in these days it has to be the environment. So we have continued that and broadened it. But what we brought of that campaign is the understanding that we have to build a big coalition that's based on a set of principles that recognizes that we have to call for and demand an end to poverty in this country that affects a huge number of people. 140 million people in this country are poor or low income.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
That's 40% of the population. So, what does that mean if that many people are held down and are not able to live a decent life, aren't able to be fully engaged in a system that they should be able to be engaged in? And while we got 40% who are poor and low wealth, we've got, the top 5 families run having the most wealth, almost, more wealth than the half of the others of us. I mean, what does that mean in this country that you've got those folks who do nothing, who don't work, who don't have to work 3 jobs just to feed their families,
Mhm.
who don't have to live without health care? What does it mean that they are really in control of this country and pushing the rest of us because of greed into poverty?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
so I'm working with this Poor People's Campaign. It's an amazing, amazing social justice campaign. It keeps me going.
Mhm.
We have work in 43 states.
Great.
The principle is no everybody in, nobody out.
Mm.
That we are bringing people together. We are targeting the government. We are targeting, the folks who are who are in quote control of this country. We are targeting the laws. We are bringing people together. We're standing together in the streets, and we're definitely looking at policies in the country. And so this campaign has the most promise of any campaign I've been involved in because of the depth of it. And the other thing is it has a moral foundation.
Mhm.
And I don't mean religious, I mean it has a foundation based on values,
Mhm.
the values that most people in this country hold, that say that we all ought to be able to live, that everybody has a right to live. And so this is the kind of campaign, this kind of social justice movement that I'm working in. And I serve as a senior advisor to it. And it is amazing to watch over time how people come together. We were just in West Virginia, and we have a Poor People's Campaign a group, a coordinating committee and structure in West Virginia, because the Poor People's Campaign is not a new organization. It's an organism, it's a movement. And that's because we're not trying to build something new. We're trying to bring people together so that we can move out of our silos and actually change some things. And
Mhm.
so we had, poor white folks and black folks and folks who worked in the mines, people saying to Mansion, no, this does not work. It
Right.
doesn't work for you to say that we don't need $15 when we can't feed our families. When we used to be coal miners and the mines are closed, they've tried to take away our retirement. And then you're going to try to separate me from my other brothers and sisters. In the
Mhm.
meeting, this one woman in this big meeting, it's all on Zoom, of course, says, you know, um, she tells her story. He says, well, call my aide. I'll work on that with you. She said, no, you work on everybody's problem.
Mhm.
That's what the
Yes.
Poor People's Campaign is. Don't separate me off. That was her
Right.
thing. Don't try to bring me in the back room and
Mhm.
give
Right,
me an
right.
extra $300. Give everybody what we deserve. And
Yeah.
so
That's right.
that's what the basis of this campaign is. And so it really goes a step further than the original Poor People's Campaign, but it brings with it the values and the thinking and the moral authority of that campaign. And so it's been a joy. I came to work, I retired in 2013 from the AFL-CIO, fully intending to knit. Well, maybe not, but fully intended to
I've
do
never
something
seen her knit.
hard work.
Never.
Right. We're getting there. We're getting there. Uh-huh.
But but I first came to the Moral Mondays movement, and then we did repairs of the breach, and then with the Cairo Center rebuilt this Poor People's Campaign. And so here I am, all these years later, still trying to figure out what my place is in this movement, because it's a special movement. It's an important movement, and I've never seen a movement that has this much promise. Now, it's not the be all and end all, because it's part of building a social justice movement, but it's a huge step forward. And so I am so, as you can probably tell, I'm very excited about the potential for this movement and kind of where it can take the country.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that. I love that. And, I think it's only further confirms how working together is really the only way to solve these larger social justice issues because it impacts everybody. And
That's
I
right.
think, sometimes we forget about that and focus on our one group. But if you think about it, there's so many intersections in
That's
everything
right.
in all of this work. So it's just essential. And I'm so glad to hear that you're not completely knitting, maybe one day. But we need your voice, your effort, your energy, and your work to continue because I think you're continuing to inspire people with this work. And it's just essential. I just don't know how people can sit back and become so complacent that you do nothing. But at the same time, it is the warriors that we have out there that are fighting for us that, we can do, everybody can do their part, I think is the part
That's
to
right.
remember.
There's something everybody can do.
Do. Yeah, absolutely. So I know that we are getting close to the hour. So I would just want to ask you one more question. And then we do have a couple of questions in the chat. So I want to open it up so that people can ask you things as well. So I think probably this is a good question to close on. What advice, Sister Roz, do you have for new and up and coming young activists? Because clearly you're of a generation of activism that is moving on and, as you said, staying in the relay but now looking to do some handoffs. What advice do you have for those folks that want to get involved?
You know, I think that one of my big worries is that especially new activists get movement fatigue.
Hmm.
There's so much movement, so much action to so many actions to be engaged in. And my biggest advice is to just stay with this and then to take every opportunity to understand it, to not just take a snippet or not take a slogan and have that define your understanding of what you're getting into, but really dig into what it is that you believe in and how it fits with building a social justice movement. But my hope is that the people who have come forward will continue to be in the movement, that they will build alliances, that they will, especially for folks who are not directly impacted by racism or by poverty or by, the ecological devastation and other ills in this country. I hope that they will move from being allies to co-conspirators.
Oh, I love that.
That folks have to not just be willing to be an ally, because that means you're supporting somebody else,
Right.
but a co-conspirator is in it.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
once you are in it, you can fight.
Yeah.
And so I would urge people to try to move from who are not directly impacted to move to being a co-conspirator
Hmm.
and not just be satisfied being an ally. Allies are great, and we need co-conspirators to take us to the finish line.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Wow. That is awesome. I mean, I don't know about you. Bilal, you sure this is your mama? Oh, sorry. She
Hey
is
now,
just too amazing.
my mama right there.
But I just want to say, just I want to ask more questions, but I really do want to give our audience a chance to kind of get in the conversation. But what I will just say in closing from kind of the primary questions we had for you is that I am just so inspired and energized by your energy. And first of all, nobody would have known that you were 72, but that's another point. So what we'll say is that we are just
Black
so
don't crack.
inspired. It doesn't. That's obvious. But what I will say is that, I mean, you truly are a cultural and social and justice filled icon. And we are just so
Yes,
glad to
yes,
have had you
yes.
with us, for you to take time out of clearly your very busy schedule to have this conversation with us. We just thank you for trusting us in our podcast with this opportunity to just have, to really start this conversation, because it won't end here. As we know, these conversations have to continue. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We have lots of folks giving shout outs in the chat online. We have folks that are in the house that are asking questions. So Bilal, even though I said I would ask the question, I think I'm going to throw it back to you. Why don't you start with the question that we got in the Zoom chat first,
Okay.
and I'll jump
And
on
this
mine.
may be a starter question.
Okay.
So, and I agree with Sabrina just in terms of time that you've allotted to us. And so maybe it's just a start for this question.
Mhm.
So the question we got is, how do you think the trauma inflicted on Black people through physical and institutional violence elicited a response from you? Right. So again, how do you think the trauma inflicted on Black people through physical and institutional violence had elicited a response from you?
So, that's a complicated question. Um, but just it is traumatic. I mean, I think that me and other Black folks and people of color are traumatized minute by minute.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, it's an ongoing trauma, and I think that for me, I've somehow learned to turn that trauma into something that I can use to be in the struggle for change.
Mhm.
But the trauma is there, and we see it every day in the lives of people who are impacted by this. We see it in the ways people respond personally. We see it in the way our organizations respond. But this trauma has an impact, certainly, and we don't have a collective way. We haven't found a collective way to deal with it.
Mhm.
And until we do, it's up to each of us to figure out how to deal with this trauma. But and I hope you psychologists will do a lot more. I know Tom Bequia, your work is on internalized oppression,
Mhm.
and that Sabrina, you have similar kinds of
Oh yeah.
similar thinking. But I really hope that y'all can help us think this through. Like, how
Mhm.
is it that we deal with this trauma?
Mhm.
Um, uh, because it's there, and we need to be able to think about it in a collective way. But it has driven me uh, to 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 realize that it's happening, but then to act in a way that moves me and movements I'm in ahead. It's a very interesting question, and I hope that that gets to it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we had one other question that just came up in the chat. And that is, what do you see being, excuse me, three hurdles or three opportunities for future civil rights attorneys?
Well, first of all, I think we need many civil rights attorneys, attorneys who are committed to social justice, who are committed to being civil rights attorneys in the real sense, which means that your service is to communities that you are representing.
Yeah.
You know, it's like civil rights lawyering. It's what
Mm-hmm.
you have to struggle for.
Mm-hmm.
In the absence of that, we've got people who are beholden to various other things, you know, precedent. They're beholden to, you know, how they look in the legal community, and kind of what cases they take. And people have to have a commitment to civil rights lawyering,
Mm-hmm.
to lawyering in a way that's change making. And there's so many examples of that. And
Mm-hmm.
then we have to force our law schools to train us to do that. When we're in
Yeah.
those settings, we have to help them create the kind of lawyers that they want to create. I mean, many
Mm-hmm.
of our schools want to have that kind of lawyer. And we, when we go there, we have to push them to do that.
Yeah.
So, and law school in itself can be a hurdle. So we have to go to these institutions with
Mm-hmm.
clear eyed about what we want out of this process, and then study so that we are prepared.
Mm-hmm.
And preparation is the key to lawyering, to organizing. We have to be prepared to step in when there's an opportunity, prepared to step in when there's an opening for us to make change. So, you know, I think that, you know, there is definitely a need for civil rights lawyers. There are many opportunities, many hurdles. It's often not where you're going to make a lot of money. So people need to understand that. But it
Uh-huh.
is a place where people can be impactful. You know, if you look at the Julius Chambers, the counselors, the lawyers who have, the lawyers who have come out of Howard University, uh, Gray in Alabama, who came out of Howard. If you look at these lawyers, they have made a tremendous difference. They have made a
Yes.
difference in the way they've advised uh, uh, movements. And so I'll tell a quick, and I know we don't have time, I'll tell a quick lawyer story. We were in
Please.
North Carolina trying to take on one of the biggest voting rights cases in the country. It was what we call the monster voting rights bill. It was
It was
probably
the biggest in the nation.
the biggest.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so we sat in a room with attorneys representing the movement. It was the Moral Mondays movement with the NAACP. And you know, we're talking about the possibilities and what's precedent and so forth. And so one of the lawyers in the room was sitting at the table, pinned to hair, and she says, you know, I'm not sure that this can go anywhere. There's no precedent for it. We've never had as plaintiffs churches, and it was a really significant kind of move away from traditional thinking about these cases. And then she turns to the rest of us at the table and she says, but what does the movement need us to do?
Mm.
So she was moving away from the traditional thinking for lawyers and saying, what does the movement need? The movement needed for there to be a legal battle, because we need to fight on all fronts, in the legislature, in the streets, and in the courts. So we
Mm-hmm.
needed that struggle wherever it went. Do you know They did that and they won that case. It was an amazing win.
Wow.
The courts, in its opinion, declared that North Carolina, that their law was a surgical attempt at racism.
Mm,
But they, under normal circumstances, other lawyers may not have gone there. And so that's what this person who's asking the question needs to think about. Are they prepared to do that?
wow.
This thing is
Wow.
smoking right now. The room is smoking. The room is smoking right now. That's what I'm talking about right there. That's what I'm
Right.
talking about right there.
Yes, yes, yes. Uh-oh, it looks like we got, are we out of time, Bilal?
I think we're gonna be out of time. I love that people asking questions. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pass them to my mom. Maybe we'll do a second part two. Get her back on here if I can convince her. Maybe sweeten the deal with some sweet treats or something.
Right.
I don't know. I gotta do something. But I think we have used up your time, and
Yeah.
we're just so thankful and appreciative for you coming on today. Just thank you so much, Sabrina. I know we got a
Yes.
lot of shout outs because we got a lot of people in the house.
Yeah, we do. We do. So I do want to just take a moment, Sister Roz, to talk about some of the people that have come out to listen to you, support you, and all of that. You may recognize there's one gentleman, Donald Pellis. Do you know him? Oh, okay. That would be Mr. Pellis, your sweet mate,
Dad in the
literally and
house.
figuratively. Yes. We also have your son Malcolm that is watching us live. We have Jabari online. We
My
have
other
my son's
son.
yes. We have my son's godmother who asked that lovely lawyer question because she's headed to law school.
Uh,
We have Patsy Delator online. And we have Leon Johnson, Liz
Patsy.
Wilderman. We have Dr. Joel online,
Hey,
Craig
hey.
Salve. We have Leon Johnson, Margaret Johnson, Lucy Lewis, Ken Giles. My husband checked in for a moment. He went back to work.
Hey, hey.
Yes. So we had a nice crowd, both online watching us and then with us in the room or the Zoom room. So we're just so thankful and glad that people had an opportunity to come out and listen to this monumental event. Thank you so much. We're just so grateful and gracious for this opportunity. Even my 6-year-old is at the door, as I told you, Miss Pellis. It wouldn't last. So, so thank you so much. We're going to
thank you
bid you a
so much.
farewell and good evening.
Thank
And
you
we look
so much.
forward to conversation number 2. We'll invite you back.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bilal, if you'll post our last slide, that would be great. And we'd like to end by saying thank you for listening to She's Always Right and He's Never Wrong. The doctors are in. This is a podcast that is done by 2 Black psychologists, Dr. Tombakwe Bailey and Dr. Sabrina Khan. And you will find on the last slide, Bilal, where you can find us on social media. We have a Facebook page, which is showing live now. We're also on Instagram and Twitter as well. And we're coming soon to YouTube. So look for us there. Thank you so much. And we bid everyone a good evening.